Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the panel on aerospace, aviation, and defense. My name is Justin Wright. I am Alberta's Minister for Primary and Preventative Services. Now, I'm pretty sure you're wondering, why is a health minister chairing this panel? Truth be told, prior to just a few months ago, I was the Government of Alberta's military liaison. So this file is very near and dear to my heart and actually came from an idea that we had leaving the last Penwar conference. So we're going to start with introductions to my left, and we will continue down the panel. And then we are hoping to have a very thorough, in-depth conversation on the cross-border nature of aerospace, aviation, and defense, and what's being done here in the region.
Good morning. My name's Barry Shibley. I'm the president of a company called Coy Wolf Technologies, and we are an Indigenous-owned company, which is owned, and we have 22 First Nations across Canada, which are shareholders in our company, providing drone services to industry and doing environmental monitoring and inspections, things of that nature. I'm also on the board of UVAD, Unmanned Vehicle Applied Dynamics, where we are currently well into the development of our supersonic military target drones.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashwin Iyer. I'm a professor at the University of Alberta Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering and the founding director of our Center for Applied Research in Defense and Dual-Use Technologies, or CARDTech for short. CARDTech is currently doing about $45 million in active research and development projects with companies like UVAD and others. The goal, of course, is to be able to accelerate the development of sovereign defense and dual-use technologies and testing capabilities in Canada.
Good morning, everyone. My name is David Sabados. I'm the head of business operations for QinetiQ Target Systems Canada. I've been in the target business, the defense sector, for 25 years. Our company produces targets for training to be used as training vehicles with the military, mostly for live fire training. So our things are bought once, used once, and it's an excellent business model. We've been doing this in Canada, the United States, and around the world for all those years. It's been an excellent career, and the companies that have grown out of us, like UVAD and Landing Zones here, just speak to the success. But we started with government work in Canada here, and so it's excellent to have an opportunity to be on a panel like this and share what we've learned and where we're going.
If I could jump in on that one, you as QinetiQ actually just celebrated a massive milestone of your 750th Hammerhead target developed right here in Alberta. And those are a naval targets that are able to be completely controlled and obviously sunk. But 750 is a huge milestone in this space, and I just want to take 2 seconds to congratulate you guys on that.
Good morning, everyone. For those that were looking forward to hearing Mr. Spencer Fraser speak, unfortunately, he got summoned to Farnborough as we had a big announcement with an investment by Airbus into our company. So we're bringing Airbus back to Alberta, which is amazing. I worked with Dave a long time ago. I remember Hammerhead 1 and 2. So I've been in this space for quite a bit. I wear a couple of hats. I'm the CFO of Landing Zones Canada. Basically out of Medicine Hat, we do a glider drone. My second hat I wear is I'm also on the board for the Alberta Aviation Aerospace Defense. And we currently have a program through the Alberta and federal called LIFT to try to help companies that are trying to get into this space to help out. So thanks to the various, we're talking about unprecedented time right now when it comes to the industry that we're in. And like I said, I've worked with Dave a long time. I've got to know Ashwin quite well there with stuff we're doing with the U of A. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. Obviously, Minister Wright's with us here in Medicine Hat.
One on. Hi, everyone. I'm Margot Marin. I'm the Director of Government and Corporate Relations for Edmonton Airport. So all of you that flew through YEG on your way here, welcome to Edmonton. It's wonderful to have you all in our city, and it's wonderful to participate in conversations like this. Edmonton Airport is by far Canada's largest airport by land mass, though we're about fifth busiest. But what we are able to do is leverage that land in a way that complements our economy in whatever way is needed. And we've done that primarily historically to date through growth of our real estate portfolio and growth to the technology and innovation tenants that we see at our airports. We also own and operate Villeneuve Airport. It's a 2,000-acre airport in Sturgeon County, and shout out to Sturgeon County Mayor Alana Natu in the back, who's been a tireless champion and advocate for the growth of that airport, and also how we can complement the Canadian Armed Forces needs as an airport that's just about a 15-minute drive down from CFB Edmonton, which is now, after a September restructuring, going to represent the 1st Canadian Division, or the headquarters for all of Canada's Army operations and our ground operations. Edmonton Airport at YEG is the planned home for the Mob West location, so a new Air Force base that will be supporting our fighter jet program with the CC-330 aircraft for refueling. It's now we're staunchly a dual-use piece of Canadian infrastructure, and so it's been an incredibly busy couple of years preparing ourselves for investments of that magnitude. And in the meantime, we've also played a leading role in convening our local economy around opportunities in defense with the creation of the Edmonton Region Defense Alliance. So that's an alliance that we do with our airports and with the University of Alberta and NATE, representing both applied research and workforce development, and with our Alberta Industrial Heartland Association, representing all of the heavy chemical and petrochemical and plastics production in the region, and our Foreign Direct Investment Agency at Edmonton Global. So it's been a really successful couple of years working towards that, and I'm excited to share more about that in this panel.
Good morning. Anthony Faust, representing the Department of National Defense, Defense Research and Development Canada, which for our American colleagues is somewhat similar to DevCom, although much smaller scale, as you can imagine. I actually grew up on Vancouver Island, went to school, did my PhD across the river at U of A. I've mined in the Yukon. I'm now down the section head for the robotics and autonomy systems in Medicine Hat, 1,000 square kilometer research facility. So I didn't know that there was an organization like this that actually represented the whole Western culture, is really what we are. And so I'm happy to be here today. When we're talking about defense and emerging technologies, I think what's really changing on the defense side is getting away from singular, monolithic, exquisite solutions and really focusing on the sustainable industrial ecosystems that will supply future capability. Everybody sees what's going on in Eastern Europe. Robotics now has been a commodity capability. It's being used at the rate of artillery shells. And that's something we have to think about. And so we have to have technologies that can ramp up and scale in production as extremely rapidly, and then turn to dual uses to maintain their capabilities when the military doesn't require them. And so we're actively moving in this direction with the Government of Canada. There's the Defense Industrial Strategy, there's NATO Diana, there's Borealis. All these are designed and intended to engage and foster that ecosystem. As a scientist for 26 years with national defense, I'm much more used to talking about Bayesian statistics and data analysis than to policy people. But it's now policy that's really going to be driving the capabilities that we go forward. So we've been asked in national defense to enable innovation through access to our ranges, to access to our subject matter expertise and our capability, our mentoring. I think this is really going to assist industry, and we know what's happening on the other side of the border as well. And so this is all try to bring a mission focus to development, to give the signals to industry about the types of capabilities and technologies that we're looking for and the actual problems that they're going to try to solve. One area, especially for me, is autonomy. And when we're talking about this is a great example. We're used to talking about single systems or companies or solutions. We really need to start talking about collaborative systems of systems, ecosystems, again, that support that, being able to exploit small and medium enterprises to get those good ideas that somebody has in their garage to help our soldiers in the field weeks later. It's no longer about the big primes. Although they'll always be necessary, we need to dig deeper. We need to give more opportunity to more people and try to figure out ways for government and policy to make that happen. One of the big things that I'll like to talk about today is that this group in particular could make inroads in is standardization. And if you imagine what the world would be like today without USB-C, if every manufacturer had a proprietary interface, say FireWire, and they changed it every once in a while, so you had to rejig everything, it's unsustainable. So when we're talking about giving opportunities for good ideas to make it into big systems, we're talking about black boxing those systems into definitions of capability and then standardizing the interfaces, whether it's data flow, mechanical interfaces, power. It doesn't really matter. Anything that we can standardize will enable everybody to participate and contribute their special sauce. It's going to be a challenge. People like the idea of standardization until it comes down to something they don't agree with. But where we can, this is a place where cross-border capability can really flourish, where somebody down in Idaho and Boise can come up with a sensor system that can plug into a Canadian platform because we've agreed to those standards. And there's organizations and structures that allow that, Five Eyes, NATO bilateral agreements, for example. But I think that's critical to try to make our capabilities move forward. Yeah, I think that's about it for me. Thanks.
Well, thanks everyone for those introductions. And there's a couple points that were really highlighted through. Today's conversation is going to be about the dual implications of both the civilian side of the technology, but also how we're supporting our soldiers on the front lines. It's also going to be about cross-border and how we're, as a region, we've been very heavily invested in from an aerospace, aviation, and defense perspective, but often it's not talked about. Operation Diana with NATO is often kept hush-hush. But we've got some things to celebrate as a Pacific Northwest economic region. We're going to dive into those. Margot, you had commented on the industrial heartland and why, all of these pieces tie together. But I just wanted to take a moment to recognize my colleague, Jackie Armstrong-Hominiuk, who actually represents the industrial heartlands. She's at the back there. So if you've got any questions that may not be answered into that space, she is in the room as well. I would really like to set up the kind of expectation on the front side of things. This is going to be an interactive presentation. We've got the screen in front of us where if you want to throw a question in there, we're going to be able to get to some of those questions today. In the last 15 or so minutes, if we're going to have microphones that are going to go around the room as well, to be able to dig in on some questions that are perhaps impromptu, that an idea is sparked based upon the dialogue. Please engage. Please make this interactive, because there's nothing worse than sometimes coming to these conferences and being talked at. Let's have a conversation together. So with that, we're going to dive right into the questions. And I'm going to start off with kind of a big picture look at the Pacific Northwest. And as a region, we have long benefited from deep economic and industrial ties across Canada and the U.S. border. What are the greatest opportunities that you feel in the cross-border collaboration in aerospace, aviation, and defense over the next decade? What do you feel that would be, and maybe some of the challenges and or pitfalls that we need to be aware of? Dave, you looked at me first. You're going first.
That sounds good. When it comes to the defense sector, there are a lot of agreements and processes in place to help support this collaborative work. The Canadian Controlled Goods Program gives us a special carve-out in the ITAR regulations to allow the free exchange of information and technology across the border with Canadian and U.S. defense companies. continuing to leverage that would be really important. I think from an opportunity perspective, making sure that companies on both sides of the border are aware of these regulations. A lot of times at QinetiQ, when we're reaching out to U.S. suppliers for the first time, they're pretty cautious around the fact that it is defense, and the ITAR regulations don't understand how easy it can be with the provisions that have been put in place. So the opportunity to educate and expand on what's already in place would be a good starting point. I think our test ranges and the collaboration between those ranges, the activities that take place on there, and really from a regulatory environment. So both countries, run their own set of drone regulations. We work really hard to hit the Canadian government or Transport Canada's or the military's regulations to operate at, say, at CFB Suffield or at CFB Cold Lake, to be able to go down and fly at, say, Pendleton or Tillabrook in the Pacific Northwest without having to go through a complete new set of regulations and assessments and qualifications. There would be an area there, specifically on military test flying, where we could be more tightly coupled, allowing for better access back and forth. So that's just a couple of points there.
I guess to piggyback off of Dave, so we basically were in 2022, we were working out of our CTO's basement. We were a true startup, but we had a really cool idea, which was a dual use technology, which originally was for the purpose of actually environmental. And when it was all said and done, we ended up catching the eyes of the US government for other purposes. Now, 3, 5, 10 years ago, as Dave could attest, if I said I was in defense, you'd look at me like I was a bad person. But now when we say we're in defense, people are like, oh yeah, defense. The amount of money that's being put into this right now is incredible. And it's a great opportunity, not only for companies like Dave's, but us small SMEs that are being able to try and help out, as kind of mentioned here, the boys on the front line. It's getting to be a bit of a dangerous world out there, as we know. So the collaboration has always been there when it comes to this area and with the US, but I think it's even more so now because it's kind of out there and we know what's out there and we're all working together, much like most of us on this panel working together. Because as you guys know, when you can take academia and provincial, federal, and then different countries working together, then we have something that really works well. So it's a very exciting time to be in this space, and we're very lucky to be here.
Before I transition to the next question, anybody else want to jump in on that one? Margot?
It's back on. So agreed on all of those fronts. Our Canadian government in the last year has announced about $40 billion in combined investments into modernizing our north. And having spent a little bit of time in the north, not even that far north, it's abundantly clear how much work we have to do from a basic infrastructure perspective to be able to provide the readiness that our Canadian Armed Forces need to provide to the rest of NATO. It's not a proud point for Canadians at all, but the work is very clear to all of us. And so at Edmonton airports and in the Edmonton region, we're the region where all the highways to Whitehorse, Yellowknife, Cold Lake, where they all originate from. So a big opportunity that I think that we are just so well positioned to grab today is just the logistics and sustainment of the growth of that infrastructure. So that $40 billion in funding is not air bases, it's airport or aerodrome modernizations. We have an incredible amount of communities in the Arctic that, for example, have gravel runways and only certain types of airplanes can land into those communities. So we have at YEG our international cargo hub that has recently broken ground. It's a 2,000-acre development of airside cargo logistics, cold storage facilities that we will be busy with all of the work going to the north and hopefully with exports as well to international locations. But this is such a multifaceted challenge to spend that money because it's not so easy to say we're going to build a new highway from Inuvik to Yellowknife. There's workforce development considerations, there's socioeconomic considerations around how we as an airport provide the right levels of security so that camp workers going into these very small communities that don't necessarily have the social work supports to have narcotics or alcohol be going into these camps. Like we can play a role in how we safely move the people and the goods and try to circumvent or prevent any kind of like dangerous goods going up and hampering the progress in the north. And so we look at all of these challenges from our position as how can we help? How do we then set ourselves up in Edmonton for the rest of the north to be successful?
Thank you, Margot. I guess we'll kind of move on to the next one, and this is more of a recognition to what was said about, governments working together, industry working together to find some standardization. So, how can government, industry, and academic institutions work together to strengthen the region's competitiveness against the growing global demand, competitors, and almost competition that's going on now in Europe and Asia? And how can initiatives like NATO's Diana work to support this type of collaboration?
Yeah, I can take that first. So there's only one way to do it, and that is to adopt the philosophy that it's all hands on deck right now. When in the conversation about continental defense, Canada has an obligation to stand up its own security infrastructure and innovation infrastructure, and it's doing that. The University of Alberta is actually a very good example for this. So through our Center for Applied Research in Defense and Dual Use Technologies, we're working on a large-scale proposal called DEFENS, the Dual Use Ecosystem for Future Engineering and National Defense and Sovereignty. And the idea is to complement local R&D capacity that we have here in the province, along with co-location with the Canadian Armed Forces. We have many defense assets in this province and 12,000 armed forces personnel in this province. To complement these with secure testing infrastructure of the kind that the United States is very well versed in through things like university-affiliated research centers. These would be centers to do secure research that would leverage the university's capacity for research and development, but also testing, evaluation, and training. Universities are engines for producing high-quality talent. And we're at a time now when the cultural sentiment in Canada has shifted towards one that connects our defense requirements to the concept of patriotism and loyalty, much as it is in the United States. And that's something that we can leverage now to provide our students with meaningful opportunities that go beyond pursuing degrees for the purpose of enjoying basic science, and now moving into something that is applied, that can deliver on relevant and realistic timelines. And the final point I'll make is that universities are actually a very important neutral ground in the conversation between end users, government, and industry. We can be dispassionate in those conversations because our goal is merely to support the growth of that sovereign innovation ecosystem.
I'll just say from the government point of view, our role is to provide the signals and the missions to drive those innovations towards things that are actually necessary. Working with the work that Ashwin's done at U of A, it's a great example. Under Borealis, which is a government initiative to try to coordinate the various numbers of innovation supporting programs across the government with industry, it's the recognition that we have to provide secure and classified opportunities for businesses and academics to understand what the actual problems are. And that's something that's been lacking in Canada, and it's actually being addressed now. And so with some of the things like I say, that initiatives like Ashwin's pursuing, that provides us the ability to push out secure communications facilities across the country is the intent, where people can be cleared and come in and actually find out what the military is actually needing without trying to basically step back and just pursue or peruse the industrial output and see, okay, what's here. It'll be much more directed, much more focused, and therefore much more likely to have a pathway to exploitation.
I'm May also add, there's, commercial programs that a ton of legwork went into with the objective of advancing a commercial opportunity that can now be pivoted and leveraged with help from our academic institutions and the regulators that we work within. And so an example of that is the drone delivery program that we've had running at YEG for several years now. We've done probably 7,500 flights of safe drone deliveries that are taking place just a few meters or feet away from our secure fence on the runway over into the city of Leduc. And when we first approached Transport Canada about this in 2020, they laughed at us and said, absolutely not, you're not doing this. But we showed that we could do this safely through procedural controls, and that we had an economic case to make sure that we were thinking about drones as the next gen of the delivery of the goods that folks need every day. And when we talk about the North and how spread out those communities are, how hard it can be to get fresh food or pharmaceuticals on time, we saw this as a technology that would improve society. But now we're seeing this work that we've done, the data from these 7,500 flights that have been done safely, as an opportunity to coach our friends in the CAF. We've heard great feedback that they actually really want to understand how we did this safely and create a standard operating procedure that will emphasize safely deploying drones in commercial airspace for the benefit of the end user. And so I think it's through these partnerships with academia and with our regulators that we can innovate and create conditions where beyond visual line of sight deliveries could happen from a controlled airspace into another controlled airspace, for example, which really starts to solve some problems at scale for everyone involved.
Margo, that's a great transition on the regulator portion. The aerospace sector really relies on integrated supply chains that cross borders multiple times. You could get some parts that go down to the US to be finished. They may have been ordered from Asia. They then get components that are manufactured and assembled in Canada. And then maybe they end up in Europe. QinetiQ, you play a lot of time and space in Europe. So there's this crossing borders multiple times with the same parts at different stages. What are some of the regulatory or policy barriers that continue to hinder this type of collaboration? And where should governments focus their efforts to make your lives a little bit easier, to make sure that we're continuing to grow this dual purpose aerospace, aviation, and defense sector across the Pacific Northwest? Dave, I see that you want to go and you're trying not to.
Yeah,
but
we'll jump on that. Again, like our experience at QinetiQ being recognized as part of the defense sector and not, in the commercial or dual use space predominantly, the governments have understood that there's a benefit to quicker access and those kind of things. And so there are carve-outs for defense specific work. If you do happen to have a defense contract, there's HST codes, harmonized tax codes that you can use to be exempt from even the tariffs that were applicable prior to to our most recent changes in the environment. There were defense carve-outs when we were supporting work with the U.S. government or the Canadian government. Taking a look at how we do that and using those carve-outs to help the companies that are participating in projects like NATO Diana or other areas as they're working to support and adopt their dual use tech for defense use, perhaps finding ways for the regulators to extend those envelopes that exist for the traditional defense contractors that have been able to use these exemptions. That would be a way to further, and reduce those barriers, especially for the young startups that are trying to get in there and may not be aware that these carve-outs do exist. So more broadly applying those would be a great way to, reduce that friction and reduce those barriers.
It's awesome. I get to piggyback off Dave all day here. So as a small company there's a couple of things I guess that I'd want to point out is that number one, our drone flies. It goes up to 100,000 feet and comes down. So you can imagine if it doesn't come down properly, it's a really expensive lawn dart. So we don't want that to happen. But the amount of regulations that go into that are quite extensive, and the special things that you need as well. So, oh my goodness, I can't believe that happened to me. It's me. So I think there's definitely lots of rules, but the cool thing about it is that we actually flew in the U.S. A month ago. So there's a lot of communication between everybody involved, and we all work together. And we're finding now with what we do here, especially a lot of the parts and stuff that we do, we're asking it to be North American or to be ally based. So there's really great opportunities in collaboration to try and bring all those components in locally or from this area and try to get away from some of the parts we've seen in other areas that we're trying to, get out and become more, ally ecosystem friendly. Apologies for the phone.
So one area that I think we can speed up with is around our certifications process from Transport Canada. Just from the micro perspective, we can't work with a company that doesn't have their Transport Canada certifications. But it's been really exciting to see some big players recently get some certifications. So whether it was Sabados on one of their larger, heavier payload drones recently, or even Canadian UAVs with their drone radar systems being certified by Transport Canada, that's a big step forward. That's where we can start to put those products into our commercial operations and see how they do, get the data, work with the academic institutions and commercial partners. And so as we spent all of this money on defense, we also reduced budgets across a lot of federal departments. And I kind of agree with both, but making sure that we have the capacity within our federal government to make sure we're certifying every single Canadian-made thing that is driving value for our economy and is being able to have interoperability and be safe in our airspaces is huge. And then also being able to certify the American products as well that are trying to come to Canada, not politicize it through certifications. Like if it's what our CAF needs, let's get her done and certified and used in Canada.
All right. And, you know, I hate to bring up the past a bit, but we're going to bring up the past. And we're going to talk about a little bit of the dark times of COVID here. And it's going to be a very strange transition, but stick with me here as we go. You know, when I look back to our time in COVID as a globe, we've seen some really turbulent times around supply chain management, around cross-border trade, specifically because people weren't able to necessarily cross the border, which meant there was breakdowns of getting specific parts across the world, really. So, what were some of the most learned lessons from some of the supply chain disruption, and how can the region better build resiliency in this critical aerospace and defense sector from a supply chain management to ensure that our manufacturing in the region continues to push forward and kind of can almost insulate itself from future supply chain challenges. I'm just wondering, we'll get the government of Canada to chime in on that, or the defense folks, but just really from the industry folks, you know, what's some challenges that you're facing that you would like to see addressed, and then we'll kind of go on from there. Dave, up again.
Yeah, it's yeah, the COVID challenge was incredible, and there were knock-on effects, through supply chains that reached far beyond just the health restrictions that were put in place. Your ability to move cargo ships, containers around the world, the backing up in port traffic, things that had been available within a week or two, all of a sudden lead times were shifting to months. It really exposed a weakness in what had become the flavor of industry in just-in-time delivery. Nobody wanted to hold inventory. That was cost and waste. Your money wasn't working for you if it was tied up in things on your shelf. And so everything was pushed back, to the point of the company digging the ore out of the ground was the first line, and everything needed to flow through and land on the end user's desk, with the Canadian forces or American forces, just in time. And it didn't take much of that was a major earthquake, but it shocked the system. It took years to recover. And we're seeing that again now in our industry, in the tech space, with the data center crunch. PCBs and components that you used to be able to pop online and have overnighted or within a week are all of a sudden, 26 weeks lead time and that kind of thing. There's not a real regulatory answer to that, from a government perspective. But companies that want to succeed in this environment are going to need to take a little more risk in terms of holding inventory. We're going to need to tie up more capital to make sure we have the raw materials, the components on the shelves when the customer comes knocking. The other thing that could happen with that is one of the major challenges. This is where industry or government can help, is the procurement cycles are really long. And if those were shortened up, the demand signals, or more predictive, we also tend to get surprised at the end of fiscal years where, if we'd had months to plan, we could deliver something, but if we've got weeks to plan, it becomes almost impossible. And so there's definitely room to improve there in terms of the demand signal from the government, specifically in terms of what they're procuring from us in the defense sector. And then the other thing is on industry, we need to invest more and not so much in infrastructure, but in equipment, in raw materials, so we can produce what's needed to be produced in an acceptable timeline.
I guess two ways I could address this. COVID was one example of supply chain disruption, but I think more critical from the military point of view, in terms of our support to industry, is the 30-year life cycles of what we've been buying. So if you imagine COVID was a supply chain problem that made it difficult for industry to manage, the other side of the coin is when the military tries to buy something once every 30 years, and that's also very difficult to manage. Much less of an issue, I think, in the States with your defense budget. But in Canada, it's quite common that we will identify a requirement, staff it, and try to stretch that life cycle out to 30 years. If you're supplying a specialist sensor for a combat engineer to do a counter IED sweep, Canada might buy 20 of them. So 20 products or 20 units every 20 years is I don't have to make payroll, but I'm guessing that's not very sustainable. So we're trying to address a couple of things. So if I go back to standardization and what I refer to as a black box of capability, what we're talking internally in the military now is getting away from the concept that we buy a solution. What we're trying to talk about now and frame in the context of procurement is buying a capability. And if you black box the components of that capability, this capability for surveillance and reconnaissance requires thermal imagery, it requires communications, it requires battery power, it needs to have a loiter time of X number of hours. If you break it down in those components, and there's a supply chain problem for a particular IR camera that somebody else can then address, as long as those standardized components, the interface between those components and the system are defined, we can swap that out. So it's not really helping the person that has the supply chain problem, but from a Canadian military capability, one camera is as good as the other, arguably, to solve that mission, as opposed to not having a capability at all. So we're trying to address that from that black box sustainable concept. We're trying to address it from getting away from the idea that we actually have a final operating capability, an FOC, to say, no, we're buying a capability and we expect to have continuous life cycle upgrades and maintenance to take advantage of the next best thing, best algorithm, best sensor, best payload, or power pack. We can't do things the same way that we do for a tank. It's not sustainable. The other suggestion I would have here that also addresses that fickle procurement problem is the dual use, and we brought that up before, is we can only recommend that if you can find other applications for something that is also applicable to the military, then that benefits everybody. It's not, I'm not looking at this selfishly. It benefits us by knowing that you are sustainable and the thing you propose, the capability you bring to the table, is going to be there when we need it. It doesn't rely on military procurement continuously to sustain that capability. We know it's going to be there. And in fact, that's the reason we're reaching out with things like Borealis and Defense Industrial Strategy to build those ecosystems, to make them resilient. If you can sell internationally, cross-border through this organization, if you can sell to agriculture or to mining, then we know that when that capability is required, it's going to be there and it's going to be scalable.
Yeah, if I could just add to what Anthony said, I think COVID was an excellent example that resilience is obtained through agility to pivot to adjacent parallel supply chains. And we have that visibility now into industry all over Canada, where industry players are considering how their technologies, even though they may not have traditionally been defense oriented, could be used for a defense purpose. And another important aspect of that is sovereign testing capability, because if you need to rapidly pre-qualify a technology in a time of need, when you're not able to obtain certain components or parts or systems, then those facilities need to be available locally. So it underscores once again the importance of having this testing capability. And on this note, I'll note that NATO Diana has precisely 2 test centers at the university level in Canada, and both of them are in the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, one at the University of Alberta and the other at the University of Saskatchewan.
I'm going to jump in with a little bit of provincial advocacy on this one, and it's definitely a dual use in nature. But we're a fly in, fly out country, right? You don't just simply get to Vancouver from Edmonton quite easily. It's it takes a long time to get there. You fly everywhere. And right now in Cold Lake, Alberta, where our Pacific Northwest fighter jets scramble from, there is no commercial air service into that community. And we are not blaming the province for that one at all. I can staunchly put that one on our federal government, because after COVID, everyone was mad because their flights were late and the jets were taking a long time to get into the fleets and operating, and they put in one of the most expensive regulatory regimes for air passenger protections that exists in the entire world. And yes, there's a very long backlog of complaints to our Canadian Transportation Association. But even worse is that the airlines have found it uneconomical to serve some of these smaller communities, and they've pulled the air service from those communities entirely. So you book your $200 ticket, they're not able to rebook you because there's not enough reason for them to be flying it over and over again in a day. They're unable to get you rebooked within the time period that it requires, and then they owe a $1,900 fine. You just can't make money doing that. And so I had the privilege of being up in Cold Lake this last weekend. We had the Cold Lake Air Show and a STARS drone conference. And Highway 28 is a scary highway to be driving. And you think about the talent that we put on that highway. I mean, we've had Canada's astronauts driving that highway before. It's a 1-lane highway for 3 hours, and it's in disrepair. And in order to protect the people that we've invested so much into in terms of their talents and skill sets, and to have predictable deliveries of the goods that they need at that base to succeed in all of the oil and gas activities that happen there as well, we need an improved Highway 28. And for the provincial policymakers in the room right now, we need an improved Highway 28. Please drive that highway safely. I did not feel safe for many parts of that drive.
No, and you're 100% right, Margot. That's why I'm so incredibly thankful for my colleague Scott Sear, who represents Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul. He has been a diehard advocate to get roadwork addressed up that way. And it's also been something that's been looked at when I look at some of the investment that could be made in Cold Lake, especially if that's where the projected either F-35 or European, I think it's the Gripen, purchase of fighter planes. That's where they're most likely going to be stationed. So we need to make sure that that road is 100% taken care of. No question there. On the regional air service, you know, this is something that's been impacted more and more across Canada, where we see our smaller communities losing air service. Provincially, we have a plan in place right now that would see regional air service return on the provincial dime. Most of us up here are from the Medicine Hat area, which if you don't know, for our Americans in the room, that's just upper Montana. For our Canadians in the room, that's just western Saskatchewan. It's as far south as you can get in the province, basically. And we just, as of June 24th, also lost our regional air service. And you figure, I believe we're the sixth largest city in the province. We have no air service. Lethbridge and Red Deer, who are 3 and 4 for largest, don't have air service as well. We are taking a very aggressive approach as a province to be able to find a solution. And if I can give some call out to our Saskatchewan members here, they implemented a regional air service initiative, about a decade ago. That seen where the provincial government was actually subsidizing X amount of seats per flight in and out of these regional airports to ensure that regional connectivity stayed top of mind. And as such, I believe it was for the first year, they subsidized about 50% of the seats that they had committed to. And from my understanding over the last few years here, it has been under 10 seats in this entire program. So we're looking to replicate that success, and Minister Dreeshen's got a phenomenal request for interest out right now to find some industry partners to come alongside with a model that makes sense to support regional air service here. And it also gives an opportunity for the private sector to really step up and say, we've got a solution to this very complicated problem.
And who's coming from the States in the room today? Do we have a lot? Everyone's from Canada here? No, we have some friends from the US. We don't have an essential air service program here, and this very much impacts our ability to operate efficiently from a dual use and defense perspective. Our Canadian government allows our Canadian airports to operate completely privately. They really do not help with a lot of infrastructure. We raise that through our aeronautic fees. And we do not have programs where government at the federal level is saying, okay, this community is so essential that we're willing to backstop the air service to make sure that you can get into that community reliably. And it works because once the passengers realize they have reliable air service that they can use instead of driving, they start using it. And then the subsidization doesn't need to exist at such a degree. But it's absolutely critical right now. It's how we can get more people using the Foremost test range. It's how we can get more people into Cold Lake doing specialized training and supporting that community for all of the mental health services, the healthcare transportation that happens. And so we're really, really encouraged that the government of Alberta is looking at this one seriously. And of course, we're looking even further north as we assess all of the spending that's happening there and the really large travel budgets for the charter flights to get workers there. We're getting and hitting this early to make sure that we are being the best airport authority we can to ensure all of that movement of the people and goods is successful.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point around healthcare. And when I look at the defense space on a healthcare side of things, traditionally when there's been conflict, we've seen some of the most aggressive advancements in healthcare technologies as well as processes in order to get honestly, to save soldiers on the front lines, if we're calling a spade a spade. So, what do you see on the horizon as being these emerging technologies that are coming from conflict now? And what do you believe is going to be the most significant transforming, we'll say, technology in the aerospace, aviation, and defense sector?
That's a really good question. Healthcare is a huge part of that one. So we're already hearing of examples in the Cold Lake area of how first responders are using drones and UAVs to assess an emergency scene, to assess what kind of fire paramedics support they need to deal with that situation. They're getting, in some cases, they're about 5 or 6 minutes faster than an ambulance or police car or fire truck could. Those minutes could save life in figuring out what's actually going on in that emergency and getting folks out there. And then when it comes just to the medical tourism that happens, it's all coming into Edmonton from the north, right? So oftentimes there's women having babies and staying in the Edmonton area for weeks on end before returning back into their communities, especially if it was complex. And so I think there's a big private sector opportunity here to be providing the hotel spaces with assistance, and Alberta seeing interest in more privately delivered clinical sort of experiences. And so I think it all intersects. But the ability for drones to bring an EpiPen or an AED to an emergency situation is really exciting. But there's some regulatory hindrance there right now. And so if we can standardize the use of these aircraft in all spaces beyond visual line of sight and do it safely to protect everyone that's around it, I think we'll see a tremendous improvement in the quality of life.
Well,
we talk a lot about new technologies emerging out of this, but I think one of the ways to frame this is not necessarily new technology, but adapting existing technology to new end use. Drones have been around for a long time. Using them to deliver an EpiPen is, as opposed to take real estate photography, is simply just expanding what we're doing with existing tech. And while it's exciting to get caught up in the concept that it is new technology being rapidly developed, it's really about creatively thinking on how to use the technology we have. The challenge, I guess, about romanticizing what's going on in the conflict zones where this is really being pushed is that stuff's happening in a regulation-free environment. There's nobody standing over someone's shoulders saying, "Hey, actually, that's probably too dangerous to do." They're facing pretty dire choices. They're taking a lot larger risks than we would take here in peacetime and private sector. And so, there's a role for us in industry and in government and regulators to find a way to strike a better balance. We perhaps have got a little complacent in peacetime in terms of how many restrictions and barriers we're going to take before we let something fly or before we try it for the first time. I'm not suggesting that guardrails should be abandoned. That's ridiculous. Those rules are there to keep the general population safe from the truly courageous there that are pushing envelopes. But there's definitely space to reevaluate how we regulate and encourage that new use, that novel use, and that innovation of tech that's already there. We're not inventing new things. There's no eureka things out there, but there are great ways and different examples to push the envelope. We need to recognize as a community that there are guardrails in place. It is going to move a little slower than we want.
yeah, absolutely.
Sorry to take off airspace, but I'm just fast, pun intended. There's little baby steps that we can do to improve this outcome for everyone. So one example is that, drones sold in Canada today off the shelf, they're not required to have like an RFID or an identifier on them. Obviously in the defense space, we want to not have those things on so that they're not detectable. But on the commercial side, it's the Wild West out there. You can't look on a screen and see what's in the air right now, but that could change if we required all of the manufacturers to have these RFID tags on them. Another example of things we could be doing differently is that in Ukraine, they have kids in grade 4 building drones, talking about drone safety, using these as a part of their learning and experience in the classroom. But these are how you teach a young child about how to be a responsible steward of your community and why it's irresponsible to take these drones and send them up too high, for example, or send them too close to an airport, for example. And so I think it's really important that we start thinking about these things in Canada right now so that these technologies can proliferate for the good of everyone.
Yeah, from the military perspective, I can't say that we have less safety requirements because soldiers are going to use them. It actually is very complicated. We are pushing the bounds daily, if not weekly. This is an active area. So right now in Canada, and this goes back to our comment that we're trying to reach out and assist industry in development. And so what does that mean? It means letting industry onto our sites, using our capabilities, operating in high fidelity operational environments, electronic warfare, counter UAS. If you're doing a chemical biological survey to give you the targets to do that, if you're doing weaponized platforms to be able to do that. None of our regulations right now are actually, even within the military, really amenable to that. So when we support counter UAS, for example, if it's not being done in a military airspace, it actually falls under Transport Canada rules. And so we're dealing with Transport Canada, asking what their rules are for smashing one airplane to another. And surprisingly enough, they don't have that, which is limiting innovation. And so we're working with Transport Canada. Within the military, our rules are really based around platforms that have people in them. So they're remarkably stringent, very focused on safety for very good reasons. But now we're talking about platforms that don't have people in it. And so can we start looking at these regulations more rationally? And it's a cultural change, and they're with us. They're on board. They understand the challenges. Some of the scenarios we imagine to try to put fences around the discussions is using a weaponized platform beyond line of sight in an area where you expect no people. So the no man's land in a minefield in Ukraine. Or you expect very few people, but you're willing to take risks because it's the forward edge of battle. Or you are willing to accept fewer risks because now you're behind the edge of battle in a logistics zone, or you're back further into civilian. So there's scales of risk that I think we're going to have to start looking at. And that's going to be in conjunction with allies. So everything we talk about in the military, it's interoperable, principally within the context of NATO is our big thing. If we're interoperable within NATO, then we're interoperable bilaterally by definition. But Five Eyes, if we press forward with regulations and we propose that to NATO as a kind of fait accompli, then that's typically what happens, of course. Yeah, this is active. We want to use drones in new ways that regulations haven't imagined. We want to weaponize drones, which our regulations haven't imagined. This is an active area of conversation on both sides of the border.
And I want to put this into sort of plain speak too, not that you were over explaining, but like what this actually means in our commercial setting at an international airport is that we are hearing from our colleagues across Canada that they're seeing a tremendous amount of drone incursions in their controlled airspace. Like this is not okay. This is a serious safety issue. But right now, if let's say that we set up a drone detection system and that we could see it on the radar, we don't have legal authority to use an electronic interceptor to take that private property away from whoever's operating it. And that's a problem. We're operating an airport that now is going to have an Air Force base at it. So I trust that these are considerations that are being discussed and that hopefully we can share our intelligence and our experience around these types of systems with the Northern Aerodromes that also may not have like the depth of commercial experience with these types of products to actually integrate them into their aerodromes, which are owned and operated by the territories in which they sit. And so this is really an example of dual use need to modernize all of these regulations, maybe change some of the legislation so it's clear around who has authority to take that drone out of the air, because we are highly motivated to be one of the first commercial airports in Canada to actually be doing this.
And if I can just chime in on the commercial side, as far as emerging technologies are concerned, what we're seeing from our clientele is requests for automated drone inspection on a very, very large scale on a number of major infrastructure projects, and then incorporating AI to review the data and report it as required. What I am seeing on the Indigenous side of things in the world that I live in is now the requests coming from a number of First Nations across particularly Western Canada in regards to firefighting and wildfires and the detection of that and keeping their communities safe. Those areas kind of fall into a unique piece because it's not always considered to be provincial jurisdiction, as the First Nations are quite under more of the federal side of things. And so that's one area is the incorporation of AI to protect the communities.
And that's a good point, bringing up just the firefighting. I think it's very relevant conversations across Canada right now. And even I look back to California just a few years ago and the fires that were going on there. Provincially, we were going through a pretty aggressive cycle of forest burn that was going on. We actually changed up how our forest fighting procedures and techniques work. We started fighting forest fires at night when it's cooler temperatures. We started integrating night vision and heat infrared, sorry, onto our helicopters in order for us to be able to see these hot zones where we could drop teams in, deal with the hot spots, go out. It diminished the amount of flare-ups that we would have during the heat of the day. And we ended up seeing pretty successful turnarounds on how we were able to address the ongoing issue of forest fire management by just changing up a few things, integrating technology that wasn't used previously during times that weren't traditionally considered to be the appropriate time to fight fires. And we have seen just a wonderful return on that investment of thought that has helped us manage and actually save on the overall burn that's gone on, specifically by adapting some of these new technologies. So, as we do look at new technologies, how are AI and machine learning changing aircraft development, maintenance, logistics, and defense applications? Well, also, how are we managing the private or public sector investments in these spaces to de-risk this machine learning and AI, we'll say, insurgents?
This is loaded question. It's it's pretty exciting times with the large language models and the AI tools that are available to us. I know our engineers at QinetiQ are excited to get their hands on it. In my experience with one of the most important things we're going to need to understand is well, there's a couple of things. So, key issue is trust. We can't be blindly trusting these models. They do tend to drift off on occasion, and so there's still a requirement for a person to be there who, with intimate knowledge, to staff check the more complex stuff to make sure that you're getting a quality product out of your AI and not just blindly trusting it. And another piece in that, just in general, I believe that, AI should be there to support human judgment. If it becomes a mysterious black box that none of us understand how it processes and how it comes to the conclusions it comes to, that will become that'll be a problem for us. It'll erode that trust and reduce its capability. We need to understand how the tool works to make sure we're using it in the best way and getting the results we're after.
Maybe if I could add to that, David. Yeah, so I mean, leveraging the immense capacity of AI for dual use applications like wildfire detection, though detecting those hotspots is an absolutely perfect application of AI and edge computing. On the military side, AI is going to be used essentially in all aspects. So speaking of drones in particular, things like machine perception, mission planning, removing humans from the loop, effectively allowing drones to operate completely autonomously. But that also brings some challenges with it. For example, in making decisions in a kill chain. A prominent Air Force general in Canada mentioned to us that that they were not in favor of autonomous kill decisions being made by drones because, and to quote that person, it is the human element that makes war detestable. And I thought that was extremely poignant and establishes a degree of a certain type of a guardrail. We heard these conversations in the US recently with OpenAI and others looking to permit the use of AI in making those types of decisions. And now Canada has not yet, I believe, proliferated its AI technology through its drone innovation ecosystem to the extent that we couldn't adhere to that new guardrail that now other countries are contending with at a much later stage.
The at landing zones, we actually did get an AI grant through Prairie Scan, which was very helpful because when you think about what we do there, AI is a big part of it. We're very lucky there. We got approached by NASA because they're trying to figure out some of this forest fire, and they saw our drone as a possibility of something that could go up there and take a look and sensor and do stuff, and then basically find a hot spot and hit it with a payload to try and make it better. And we've actually received a grant as well from the Alberta government. So thank you for that there to do that. And again, it's interesting because with Ashwin, one of the students that's working on it is from the University of Alberta. So it's a good example here. We talk about dual use technology like we are, and then all these people that are in the room, even on this panel, that are working on solving this problem. And a big part of it is AI, because when you think about whether it's defense or forest fires or anything, you don't want a human in the loop for that sort of stuff there. You want it to be able to do it. So it's going to be able to program, it's got to be able to think to the best of its ability and get where it gets to. But I was talking to some University of Calgary students, and AI is a tool, but at the end of the day, it is still a tool, and we still need to keep building on that. And we just can't rely. My daughter, she does proposals for me here and there, and I read her proposal, and it's like, what is that mess? Because she's basically used ChatGPT to write her proposal for me, and it's like, you need to still use critical thinking and expand the where we're going to go, and not just use that sort of tool. It's a tool. So AI is really great. We've been very lucky with it, and we need it, and we had a lot of help, but we still got to keep going from there on it.
I'll take this from the perspective of the weaponization of AI. It's clear and obvious that the attacks are becoming a lot more efficient using AI, and we can't allow for cybersecurity to take down critical infrastructure that serves both a commercial and a military purpose. And so I totally agree with that human eye being part of it. There's new legislation that, requires every company that fits in the definition of needing to have these resilient cybersecurity systems to show their plan and to make sure that they have the right systems in place. But if you don't have the right team members that are diligently following the right procedures every single day, you risk having an airport be taken down for an indefinite amount of time, which is just not something that the Canadian economy or that our armed forces can tolerate. And it really is about using that critical thinking and having uncomfortable situations where it's like calling a partner up and being like, no, I'm not clicking that link. You have to send it to me a different way. And it's awkward, but there's no excuse around it. And so it's using our critical eyes to leverage AI in the best way possible to drive value for our businesses, but also using it to defend, knowing it's being used against you, and being defensive at all times from it.
There's also some security concerns now around AI. As yesterday's announcement or statement by OpenAI that one of their AI agents escaped a sandbox and went rogue and attacked another company and began sort of a cyber attack on another company. It had to be reined back in, and it was apparently a Chinese platform that they utilized to be able to get control of the AI agent. So what I think that shows is just sort of heightens the concern around security for our airports, our military.
The military has no option but to adopt AI. It's not a choice. If you look at how decisions are made in the battlefield, there's the observe, orient, decide, and act. The faster you can do that, the faster you can beat your enemy. The faster your enemy does that, the faster they can defeat you. We have no choice. What I'm concerned about, and some of the fundamental research that we're promoting is, and we've alluded to it here, is understanding its bounds of credibility. I think we always talk in the military about enabling soldiers, not replacing them. So AI will be another tool that enables decision making. There will be people in the loop. It just depends on how big the loop is underneath them. And so if we look at collaborative systems, multi-platform collaborative systems, and autonomy that are mission-based instructions, so a single soldier tasks a fleet of platforms to screen a ridge line for tanks. That's a simple command that a soldier gives and now launches 5 or 6 platforms that coordinate amongst themselves using AI to divvy up the mission, achieve the mission, and report back. So the soldiers will be in charge. You're enabling the soldiers to make decisions and act. What was said here, though, is how do we know that AI is doing its job? How do we know that AI trained to identify a tank in summertime in the Balkans is equally efficient at detecting a tank in the wintertime in Ukraine? And so those are the research questions that we're pursuing to try to get ahead of that problem. It's not something that a lot of people are thinking about quite yet, but trying to put bounds on AI from that perspective is the safety factor that we're trying to build into this. But there's absolutely every military absolutely will have to use AI for good or for bad to try to maintain the technological advantage.
So, as we talk about technological advantages and some of the changes that are coming and underway, I look at many of our aerospace employers citing workforce challenges as being one of the major challenges that they face. What skills do you feel are going to be most in demand over the next decade, and how can educational institutions adapt their programs to prepare students for the rapidly evolving aerospace, aviation, defense, and AI-enabled technologies?
I could take that. We're already doing that. So the signals that we have heard are that our educational programs, if they are to play a role and contribute to the national sovereignty effort, have to be amenable to incorporating end user guidance. And so to that end, we've been partnering with the Canadian Armed Forces to understand their requirements. We include Canadian Armed Forces personnel and members of defense industry, like those on stage today, in our curriculum development programs for all of our engineering degrees. And we are taking their feedback seriously. This is not artificial in any sense. This is also because our students have demanded meaningful educational experiences. And traditionally, as I mentioned earlier, meaningful just meant fun science. But it's more mission critical now. Meaningful means doing something for the country, for the continent, for bilateral cooperation between our two countries. So that's one effort. The other thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to structure graduate research projects with defense industry in a way that is relevant to their timelines. In the past, graduate research projects would have been 4 or 5 years long, with deliverables expected at the end of those projects. And defense doesn't operate on those timelines. And so we have restructured, essentially turned that triangle on its tip to provide early stage deliverables with pre-trained researchers that can, in the background, mentor younger students, junior students, to get them ready to produce deliverables at the same pace within 1 or 2 years. And this has been a very successful model for us. And as a result, we're essentially working with every company on this stage.
Sure. From an employer point of view, I guess I would be in this particular case. What we're seeing in defense research now is we're getting away from internal development of bespoke solutions, which was kind of our bread and butter over the last 70 years. Taking in-house captive scientists focused on very niche military requirements that had very little industrial application. Now, really what we're trying to do is operate, instead of the 10-foot level, as the 10,000-foot level, and focus our abilities to rapidly assess and integrate, prototype, and demonstrate solutions for the military for input technologies coming from industry and academics. So we want to have these sandboxes and rodeos and prototype demonstrations fast and rapid every quarter, taking the best of what's going on right now in industry. So from my point of view, the people we're starting to hire now, I'm really looking for flexible generalists, deep backgrounds in STEM, but people that are excited about learning and applying new technologies continuously. We're not looking for deep subject matter expertise or technical capability in a particular area anymore. If you come to us, and this is what I tell students, if you come to us with a scientific background and aptitude, and you're excited about doing rapid experimentation and fielding technologies for the military, then that's who we're going to try to hire.
And I have to take just a much more simple approach to this, and the workforce development being a key bottleneck to our entire defense ambition and success in Canada. We are in a dire need from the aviation perspective for more trained aircraft mechanics, for more pilots, for more drone pilots, for more air traffic controllers. They're already bottlenecking the system today, and now we're going to be adding a capacity in that is unprecedented in our history. We have to think about these things differently with historic enrollment into the armed forces. How do we provide these training pathways in a dual use way? Then it's going to benefit our local economies and what we need in terms of capabilities in our armed forces. Any elected officials in Alberta, please help us advocate for aircraft mechanic program to be reintroduced into the Edmonton region. As soon as we see the successful proponent that's been selected on the Mob West base at YEG open operations in 2030, we will see a draw of all of the talent and folks that are able to get certified on that aircraft going over to that new employer. And we still have one of Canada's largest fixed wing private aviation bases at YEG. We have commercial connectivity that won't grow unless we have the right workforce to service new air service into all the communities that we talked about just prior to this. And I think it's an under-celebrated fact that the Edmonton region is a UNESCO learning city. We have such a high concentration of post-secondary institutions here per capita. I think 140,000 enrolled students or something right now in the Edmonton region. We have capacity to train the CAF, whether that's paramedics, whether that's cooks or engineers or electricians. We have the seat capacity to grow that here. And so it's a really exciting time for our region because I think there's a lot of stars aligning for us to be helping solve some of those problems.
Folks, we are down to the last 16 minutes of the presentation. We're going to be sending around a microphone here in a little bit. Just Saeed, my chief of staff, is right here in the front. If you want to give him a wave, he'll be able to bring a microphone over to you. As he's getting ready and around the room, I'm going to finish up with just two questions, and then we'll bounce it over to the rest of the audience here. You know, when I take a look at the growing geopolitical uncertainty, you know, I really wonder how should the Pacific Northwest position itself as a key contributor to Fortress North America in our defense, security, but also in our commercial aerospace. What can be done to keep the turmoil that's being experienced across the globe at bay, while us also adding to the defense of Fortress North America? But also, how are we attracting young people and underrepresented groups to this initiative of supporting the needs of the continent and the region?
I think, you know, in terms of attracting young people, we need to be able to demonstrate that there's a future in what we do. You come out of school looking for a career, something to balance or to be a counterbalance to the gig economy, whereas people freelance their way through lives. If we can show meaningful, long-term, stable employment, that's a great way to attract young people to that kind of thing. Our aviation, aerospace, and defense has always been a kind of a shining star, if you will, when young people are out there imagining what you can do in the world. You know, right after they decide they want to be an astronaut, you know, the fighter pilot's the next on the list, and the kind of things we do are as adjacent to that as you could possibly get. And so, you know, helping those kids realize those dreams, let them know that they're right here. You don't need to move away to do that. You know, speaking from a small town perspective in Medicine Hat, when I get the opportunity to speak to kids in elementary school or I go in high school, to let them know that in our region, you know, in the Southeast, you can do this kind of work. It's taken me all over the world, and you don't need to move away to do that. You don't need to leave the small town, or you don't need to leave Western Canada or the Northwest Economic Region. So as long as we continue to reinforce those messages and highlight that this is available as a space, I think that's a great way to attract that talent.
And if I could build off that really quick, something that is being done in Medicine Hat is we actually have these types of programs starting at the high school level. One of our local school districts, Prairie Rose School Division, they're actually training pilots who will graduate with their pilot's license at the same time as their high school diploma. They're working on getting aircraft maintenance engineering credits for these folks as they graduate. These are all dual credits that are designed to get folks engaged in the aerospace sector at a very young age, in order to make sure that we are padding the number of pilots that we have, padding the number of aircraft maintenance engineers we have. When I look across North America, pilot shortages are on the horizon, and this is one way that we can kind of stem and cut off some of that shortage by implementing some of these programs at the public school and high school level. And we'll go down to our friend at the end there.
Sure. I was just going to make a pitch for the West here. In over the next 10 to 15 years, eventually drones will become everyday. AI will become everyday. People will be doing all over the place. They'll question why we dragged our feet to begin with. But right now, there's a lot of concern with safety, regulations, testing, things like that. What we have in spades in the West is open space with nobody in it. And Canada's running into this right now, and I'm sure my colleagues down in DevCom and ARL are as well. It's very limited what you can do on the East Coast because of population density. We have Medicine Hat, Foremost, Montana, Inuvik, Yellowknife. These are places that you can do a lot of testing, get a lot of waivers for safety and technical requirements to do beyond line of sight development, weaponized platform development, anything that's highly regulated. We have the space to do that. And then, of course, we have our colleagues on the West Coast with their innovation centers as well. So as a community represented by this organization, we have a real leg up with testing facilities, at least over the next foreseeable future.
Well,
hats off and kudos to the defense industrial strategy and the policymakers behind it in rewarding meaningful Indigenous participation in investments. We absolutely see the success of new training institutes or opportunities benefiting everyone, but because they're focused on Indigenous training first. This is how we can overcome some of the barriers to a final investment decision on a larger scale facility. We have such a large population of Indigenous people in this part of the country, and historically they've had the highest high school dropout rates or unemployment rates. This is a real once in a lifetime opportunity to provide meaningful employment, meaningful training that's really centered around what those community needs, and especially in the north, folks working in aerodromes, coming down south to get their training, it's culture shock. Like, it is a different world up there, and there's these opportunities now to be providing training in a way that promotes retention of those folks in their jobs, and that improves the stickiness and sustainability of that workforce. And so I think that's something that Canada can be really proud about, especially if we do it well, is that we design this entire thing around a reconciliation lens.
If I can just quickly add one thing to that. We work in very remote areas, particularly at Coy Wolf, doing infrastructure inspection quite often on pipelines, right-of-ways. On the Trans Mountain project, the 1,500 kilometers of pipeline that we were inspecting, we were flying 24 hours a day during the construction. And along that line, 73% of our crews were made up of Indigenous drone pilots. That I did not expect that at all. I thought we'd be lucky if we got to maybe 10 or 15%. But the amount of training that's going on in this area in Indigenous communities across, I know, Western Canada is actually quite remarkable. And to have 73% of your workforce to be qualified and Indigenous on a project is an extremely high number.
Wonderful. We'll go to Saeed out on the floor.
Thank you and good morning. I feel like this is my office expanded today. I'm Marty Deacon and I am a Canadian senator and I chair Defense, Security and Intelligence. So everything you've said today is so, so critical and so important. My question was exactly stolen by the moderator, the last question about Fortress North America. Like, it is a question that I ask repeatedly and drawing our youth, and the examples were fantastic. I am flying to Medicine Hat in 2 weeks, and I was stunned on my routing from Toronto. Like, I was surprised. I just was like, wow, this is not a good thing. And I've made some inquiries on that. Our committee has done the, what I would call 10 stops throughout the Arctic region. The infrastructure we talk about at tables comes to life like nothing else when you look at what needs to happen in a really meaningful and integrated way. So lots of questions I could ask, but I do want to thank really all of you, and my door's open. The second question I was going to ask, we just had NATO meetings in Turkey, and we've had Canadians, and through your connections, you may have had some table talk with some folks that were there. I don't know. But this year at NATO in Turkey was the first year that they really tried to make a concentrated effort to bring in CEOs. And for Canada, it was 8 that are at the table, that are doing the work that politicians talk about in a 30,000 step level. So my question today is, we had in Canada 8 CEOs. I don't know who is there from the States, but do you feel that the work we're doing, and I think Penmar is a great example, is getting to the decision makers and they're listening to the real stories on the ground? We're buried in procurement right now. It's a mess. So we're trying to look at the different ways on how we keep Canadian businesses thriving in Canada and not, jumping the hoops elsewhere that are shorter. So any insider intel on that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
I know if Spence was here, he would have lots to say on that topic.
I'd say that we do a pretty good job. I think the biggest, you talked about, you had 8 CEOs, which is amazing. I think that's a really great. But for us, what about the small SMEs? How do we get to that table and have those discussions? Because we have the technology that's coming in. Or what about the current companies right now that are not in defense? They're trying to get into defense, but it's so hard because the regulations and the connections and just that sort of stuff. So I think that for the most part there, I know at landing zones here, we have really great partnerships with the province, with the city, with the federal government, and with our partners in the US and around the world, including right now some of the work that we're doing in Japan, which is really cool because after obviously Mr. Carney went over there, now there's trade missions going over there, Japan, not like we forgot about Asia, but Asia's back really on the market. So I think we're doing a pretty good job. I think the biggest thing though is when you're having those conversations, remember the small guys too, because we have a lot that we can bring to the table, and sometimes we kind of get forgotten, just by the scale of things.
And I hear you. And we did have that well voiced in the planning for Turkey, because the SMEs are so vital and so important, and feel left out, feel second class, and feel like they're getting the crumbs. So that is something that we pointed out very, very strongly, that they be at the table and the question be asked at every single table.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that dialogue.
And if I may add a perspective from the aviation industry too, it's that the aviation industry hasn't historically moved all that fast on workforce development. And this is true kind of across North America. United has really made some changes around workforce training that is, I hope, a trend that will continue across North America. And of course, WestJet has invested heavily into workforce development, but the rest maybe haven't as much, and it's been slow. They're looking for that investor certainty. They're looking for final investment decision announcements that can allow them to make investment decisions to support whatever's going on. And so the sooner that granularity around investment decisions are made, the faster these historically very slow companies can respond to the need. And let's not underestimate how slow they sometimes are moving on that front.
All right, we're going to go to the other microphone and the tall drink of water and the cowboy hat.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. So MLA Shane Getson, Laxton and Parkland, welcome to God's country. So Margot, big plug out to you and your organization. And I love the fact when we start talking about getting our little airports working. And Margot, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, I was in the hydrogen one earlier, but we had an amazing thing happen at an air show. We had a bunch of people get together. We had them talking about what the possible was. We had a number of school divisions start firing up some of these courses. One thing led to another a couple of years later. YEG actually donated one of their buildings to Sturgeon Public. We now have a STEM school that's being put right at the airport, which is overprescribed. So these are the type of models to do. So please give her a big round of applause for helping us out and be innovative on that side of things. Sturgeon County, the mayor, the school division, they all worked together. That was awesome. So the other thing, recently I was over in Germany on a bit of a mission over there. We had a ton of things coming back to the senator's point on NATO. A lot of the Eastern Bloc states over there, or the former Eastern German states, they're developing a ton of tech that's coming out of Ukraine when it comes to the drone and the aerospace. They have no space to test these. So what I would propose is the Penwar group and leadership that we should do, and I want to run this by you guys on the stage. Can we actually reach out through our network connections and get some of those folks and extend an invitation so they can come here? Because that's the thing. When I started talking about the size of Alberta, we're twice the size of Germany, half the population, 62% forested. They don't know this. Like the military folks know it, the aviation folks know it, but the other ones at the state and the subnational levels, they do not know this. So if we really want to be aggressive, we really want to develop the region, can we use your network so we can get some of those folks to actually come here next year? And Boise would do a phenomenal job. So I want to challenge you with that and think about anything else that you can answer quickly of how do we rapidly accelerate this, because the
Would you
world
mind
is
if I
not
grab
waiting
one?
for us. This stuff is happening
Yeah,
without us.
that's awesome.
And if we
Thank
just
you
keep
so much.
talking about it
Appreciate it.
rather than doing it, we're going to miss the boat again. You can clap if that was good.
It's fantastic. There's successful examples of some of that happening already. This past summer, QinetiQ had a group of students come from Japan. They're going to be operating our target systems, and so we brought them to CFP Suffield for a 6-week training course where they got to do flight trials and that kind of thing, because that was the best space in the world to do it. It just happens to be in our backyard.
How are you?
That doesn't come without cooperation from the Canadian forces and the federal government, however. And so, I appreciate that you challenge industry to use our connections across the globe to point folks to Canada. But ultimately, we're not the gatekeepers of those spaces. And so that will require support, specifically from the Canadian forces and the federal governments to embrace our partners, to find industry partners here, and to make use of that space that's Anthony mentioned that is our biggest asset in the West, the space to use those ranges. So it is something we're doing. It's something we want to continue to do, but we can't do it alone.
I'll take 20 seconds to say that one of the major components of this initiative I mentioned at the top is to build secure facilities. And one of those facilities, as an example, is building indoor large-scale electronic warfare threat environment generation facilities. So being able to qualify technologies for their resilience against electronic attacks before they're sent to the battlefield. And this is a perfect environment in which we can co-locate industry, end users in the armed forces, academia, in order to build up those technologies and their resilience.
All right, folks, I have been told that we have no time left. So unfortunately, we're going to have to stop there. I want to thank each and every one of you from joining today. And if I could leave you with one takeaway from this panel, it's to really examine what areas of regulation we as legislators can directly make positive impacts on our private sector and our proponents, as well as our post-secondary institutions who are looking to evolve in this space to make sure that we are focused on Fortress North America. And with that, I thank you all for attending and really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us here this morning. Thank you.